I believed the lie about the 3-day conference until I gripped the steering wheel. Evan played the devoted husband perfectly at the terminal. But then my 8-year-old son leaned forward and whispered the words that froze my blood. He said, "Mom, we cannot go home." I looked up to see a stranger approaching my car with terrifying confidence. I realized my husband had not just left town. He had set a trap. My name is Sierra Whitlock. I am 33 years old, and I work as a systems technician for Crestline Facilities Group. My entire career is built on the principle that people lie, but logs do not. I trust timestamps. I trust access codes. I trust the cold, hard reality of data. If a door opens at 3 in the morning, someone opened it, regardless of what they claim they were doing in their sleep. I have spent 10 years diagnosing system failures, but I never thought to run a diagnostic on my own marriage until this morning. Evan was too perfect. He wore the sandalwood cologne I had bought him for Christmas, the one he usually saved for anniversaries. He kissed me in the kitchen with a lingering pressure that felt less like affection and more like a scene from a movie, rehearsed and blocked for maximum emotional impact. He talked about his conference in Seattle with the smooth, practiced cadence of a man reading a teleprompter. I tried to ignore the itch at the back of my neck. I told myself I was being paranoid, that marriages go through phases, that kindness should not be suspicious. I drove him to Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport under the brutal morning sun. My 8-year-old son, Miles, sat in the back seat. Miles is usually a chatterbox, filled with facts about sharks or Minecraft, but today he was silent. He stared out the window at the passing cacti and concrete, his small hands gripping the seatbelt strap. I pulled up to the curb at Terminal 4. Evan leaned over, kissed my cheek, and squeezed my shoulder. "I'll call you when I land." "Sierra," he said, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Take care of Miles. You know how overwhelmed you get sometimes." The comment stung, misplaced and patronizing, but I let it slide. He grabbed his bag and shut the door. I watched him walk through the sliding glass doors, merging into the crowd of travelers. I put the car in drive and merged back into the traffic, letting out a breath I did not know I had been holding. "Okay, buddy," I said, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Do you want to get ice cream before we head back?" Miles did not answer immediately. He unbuckled his seatbelt, which was strictly against the rules, and leaned forward between the 2 front seats. His breath hit my ear, warm and trembling. "Mom, we can't go home." My hands froze on the steering wheel. I checked the mirror. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a terror that no child should ever know. "What are you talking about?" "Miles, sit back and buckle up." "No," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You don't understand. I heard him in the garage last night when you were in the shower. He was on the phone." I merged into the middle lane, my heart hammering a sudden, violent rhythm against my ribs. I kept my voice steady, a skill learned from years of managing high-pressure security breaches. "What did he say?" "Miles." "Tell me exactly." He said, "She will break today. She will sign anything." Miles took a shaky breath, tears pooling in his eyes, and then he said a name. He said, "Don't worry, Marla. It is done." Marla. The name hit me like a physical blow. Marla Kingsley, the woman Evan had introduced 6 months ago as a risk management consultant for his firm. She had sat in my living room, drinking my coffee, smiling at my son. I did not scream. I did not cry. I flipped a switch inside my head, the same one I used when a server room overheated or a perimeter alarm triggered. This was no longer a family outing. This was a critical system failure. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. The screen lit up with a message from Evan. "Honey, I just want you to relax while I am gone. For Miles's sake, please try to keep it together if anything happens today. I know you have been struggling." The text was not a message to me. It was a liability waiver. It was evidence. He was establishing a narrative of instability before the event even occurred. Mom, Miles asked, his voice small. Are you mad at me? No, I said, my voice sharp and clear. I need you to listen to me. Miles, did he say anything else? Anything about a time. He said, the flight is just cover. I will be watching. I looked at the exit signs. If I went home, I was walking into a trap. If I kept driving, I was fleeing, which would play right into their narrative of an unstable mother kidnapping her child. I needed a blind spot. I needed to disappear while remaining in plain sight. I jerked the steering wheel to the left, cutting across 2 lanes of traffic to catch the loop back toward the airport terminals. Where are we going? Miles asked. We are going back, I said. I drove past the departures level and swung the car into the short-term parking structure. I knew this garage. I knew that the lighting on level 3 was notoriously bad and that the camera coverage had dead zones near the south pillars because of the concrete support beams. It was a flaw I had noted in a casual audit years ago, and now it was my lifeline. I backed the car into a dark corner, shielded by a large van and a concrete pillar. I killed the engine. The silence in the car was heavy and suffocating. I turned to Miles. I needed him to be a soldier, not a child. Miles, give me your iPad. Now. He handed it over. I shoved it under the seat along with my own phone. Listen to me, I said, gripping his hands. We are going to play a game called Ghost. You cannot turn on any device. You cannot touch the GPS watch on your wrist. If you see anyone at all, you duck down and do not make a sound. Do you understand? Is Dad bad? He asked, his lip trembling. I don't know. I lied, but we are going to find out. I stared out the windshield at the rows of parked cars. My husband had not flown anywhere. He was still here. And if Miles was right, the show was just beginning. I pulled Miles from the back seat and dragged him behind the concrete pillar just seconds before the headlights swept across the grille of my SUV. We crouched in the oil-stained darkness, the smell of gasoline and old rubber filling my lungs. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, but I forced my breathing to slow. Panic is just unorganized data. I needed to see what the system was doing. A black sedan glided to a stop 3 spaces down. It did not park. It idled. The engine hummed with a low, predatory vibration. 3 people exited the vehicle. They moved with the synchronized efficiency of a team that had run this drill a dozen times. They were not looking for me. They were looking for my car. The woman in the lead stepped into the pool of flickering fluorescent light. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. It was Marla Kingsley. I had made coffee for this woman. I had sat across from her at my kitchen table while Evan introduced her as a corporate risk consultant who was helping his firm navigate a merger. She looked different now. Gone was the warm, professional smile. Her face was set in a hard, focused mask. She wore a tailored trench coat and black leather gloves that looked too tight, too clinical. She did not use a Slim Jim or a lockpick. She raised her hand and pressed a button on a key fob. My car chirped. The sound echoed violently in the empty garage. Evan had given her a key. Stay down, I mouthed to Miles, pressing his head against my chest. I raised my phone, peering around the rough edge of the pillar. My hand was rock steady. I hit record. Marla opened the driver's side door. She did not look inside to check for occupants. She assumed the car was empty because she assumed I was already on my way back to a house that was no longer mine. She knelt on the concrete, her movements sharp and practiced. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a rectangular package wrapped tightly in heavy black plastic. It was the size of a brick. She slid it under my driver's seat. She didn't shove it. She placed it with precision, ensuring it was hidden but easily discoverable if someone knew where to look. She stood up and stepped back. She pulled out her own phone and began snapping photos the open door. The license plate, the position of the car in the garage. The man standing by the sedan fender raised a phone to his ear. I zoomed in. I needed the audio. Done, the man said, his voice carrying in the hollow acoustic space. Just like Evan wanted. We are clear. He hung up. Marla closed my car door. The thud felt like a gavel coming down. They returned to the sedan without exchanging a word. The car reversed and vanished down the ramp, slipping back into the city traffic as if they had never existed. I waited 2 full minutes. 120 seconds of silence. Then I stood up and pulled Miles back to the car. "Mom!" "Who were they?" Miles whispered, his eyes wide with confusion. "Nobody," I said. "Get in the back. Do not touch anything." I opened the driver's door but did not sit. I kept the video running. I aimed the lens at the floorboard. The edge of the black plastic package was just visible beneath the seat. I did not touch it. Fingerprints were a narrative I could not control. Instead, I filmed the dashboard. December 30th. I said aloud, my voice flat and monotone for the recording. 10:14 in the morning. Phoenix Sky Harbor. Terminal 4 garage. Level 3. Package planted by Marla Kingsley and unidentified male associates. I panned to the odometer. Mileage is 42,318. I stopped the recording and uploaded it immediately to a secure cloud server that Evan did not know existed. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Evan. "I just alerted the family safety unit. They are going to stop by for a wellness check. They just want to ensure Miles is safe given your recent episodes." I stared at the screen, and the final piece of the architecture clicked into place. The package wasn't a bomb. It was drugs. Or illegal cash. It was something that would turn a traffic stop into a felony. Evan wasn't just trying to divorce me or embarrass me. He was building a file. Unstable mother. Paranoia. Possession of controlled substances. He wasn't trying to win custody. He was trying to erase me. If I went home now, the police would be waiting, tipped off by a concerned husband, and they would find exactly what Marla had left for them. I got into the driver's seat. I felt the presence of the black package beneath me like a tumor. Mom, Miles asked. "We are leaving." Miles. I started the engine. The instinct was to stomp on the gas, to screech the tires and run. But in America, a mother driving fast is a mother fleeing a crime. I put the car in reverse and backed out slowly. I drove down the spiral ramp at exactly 25 miles per hour. I used my turn signals. I stopped completely at the stop sign. I drove like a woman who had nothing to hide, even as the evidence of my destruction sat inches beneath my own legs. I pulled into a desolate gas station 3 miles from the airport, the kind with flickering fluorescent lights and pumps that still used manual levers. I did not fill the tank. I parked in the shadow of the car wash, turned off the ignition, and locked the doors with Miles inside. I needed distance to look at the threat, both physically and mentally. I walked around to the passenger side and held my phone up to the window. I hit record. Through the tinted glass, the black plastic brick under the driver's seat was barely visible, a dark void against the gray upholstery. I narrated the time and location again, my voice devoid of the panic that was clawing at my throat. I did not touch the door handle. If I opened that door, my fingerprints would be on the frame, placing me at the scene of the discovery. I needed the chain of custody to remain broken. Back in the driver's seat, I pulled up the dashcam interface on my phone. The camera had been recording when I dropped Evan off. I scrolled back to the timestamp 8:45 in the morning. On the small screen, I watched my husband walk toward the automatic doors of Terminal 4. He paused. He did not check the departure board. He did not head toward the TSA checkpoint. Instead, he checked his watch and veered sharply to the left, toward the exit leading to the ride-share pickup zone. He walked with purpose. At the edge of the frame, a gray sedan pulled up. He opened the back door and got in. He had not flown to Seattle. He hadn't even entered the airport. I switched apps to our joint bank account and my email. I searched for Delta, American, United, Hilton, Marriott. Nothing. There were no pending charges. No boarding passes in the archive. No baggage fees. A 3-day business trip to a major city costs at least $1,000. This trip had cost 0 cents. The conference was not just a lie. It was a lazy lie. He hadn't bothered to create a paper trail because he never expected me to look. He expected me to be in a holding cell by noon. I started the car. Mom Miles asked from the back, his voice small. "Put your headphones on." "Miles," I said. "Watch a movie. Do not look out the window." I drove back toward our neighborhood in Gilbert, but I did not go home. I took the service road that ran behind our subdivision, parking 2 blocks away with a view of our cul-de-sac through a gap in the oleander hedge. My stomach dropped. A police cruiser was parked diagonally across our driveway. Behind it sat a white sedan with the seal of the Department of Child Safety on the door, the Family Safety Unit. A man in a cheap suit stood by the mailbox, holding a thick file folder, looking at his watch like a man waiting for a dentist appointment. And there was Marla. She was standing on my front lawn, her arms crossed, chatting with a uniformed officer. She looked relaxed, concerned but composed, like a helpful neighbor. She was already playing the role of the stabilizing force in a chaotic situation. She was the witness. The man in the suit was the executioner. My phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize. I stared at it for 3 rings, then swiped answer. I put it on speaker but kept it muted for a second to compose myself. "Hello," I said. "Sierra?" "Thank God you picked up." Marla's voice came through the speakers. It was terrifyingly calm. It was the voice of a hostage negotiator speaking to a jumper. "We are at the house. Evan is..." "He is frantic. He called us when you didn't come home." I watched her through the windshield. She wasn't holding a phone to her ear. She was using an earpiece, her hands free, her posture open. "Who is us?" "Marla," I asked. "The police, Sierra, and a caseworker. We just want to talk." "We just need to ensure Miles is safe. You know, given your history, everyone is just worried you might have had an episode." "My history?" I repeated. "Sierra, please, don't make this harder. Just drive home. If you are innocent, you have nothing to fear." "Right. Just bring Miles back." I looked at the police car. I looked at the man with the file. I realized then that her calmness was a weapon. In a situation like this, the person who screams is the crazy one. The person who cries is the unstable one. The person who speaks in a low, level monitor is the one the police believe. If I went back there, crying and shouting about conspiracies, they would take Miles before I even turned off the engine. "I am safe." "Marla," I said, and I hung up. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat. I could not go to a hotel. They would track the credit card. I could not go to a friend's house. They would call my contacts. I needed a place that did not exist in their database. I thought of the Old Town Tech Center. It was a derelict server farm on the edge of the city that Crestline Facilities Group had managed 5 years ago. I had done the final decommissioning. It was abandoned, power cut to the main grid, but I knew the backup generator had a manual override and, more importantly, I knew the camera system there was hardwired, not cloud-based. It was a dead zone, a black hole. I put the car in gear and drove away from my house, away from the life that was being rewritten without my permission. I was done reacting. I was done feeling. I needed to stop thinking like a mother and start thinking like a technician. They were trying to delete me with a story. I was going to destroy them with data. The dusty air of the abandoned server room smelled of ozone and stale copper, but the glow of my laptop screen offered a familiar, sterile comfort. I did not need the cloud. I did not need Wi-Fi. I plugged directly into the hardline trunk that still held a ghost of a connection to the city's fiber grid, a backdoor I had left open years ago for diagnostics. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the consumer interface of my smart home system and diving straight into the admin root directory. Evan knew how to use the app on his phone to turn on the lights or lower the thermostat. He did not know that every digital heartbeat of our house was logged, time-stamped, and mirrored to a partition that only I could see. I pulled up the user access logs. My breath hitched. A device labeled MK Primary had been granted Level 1 clearance 3 weeks ago. That was not guest access. That was administrator status. Marla Kingsley had the digital keys to my front door, my cameras, and my safe before I had even poured her that cup of coffee in my kitchen. I navigated to the camera archive. I filtered for timestamps when I was clocked in at Crestline. The screen filled with thumbnails. I clicked on a file from December 12th, 10 in the morning. The video played in high definition. Evan walked into our home office, followed closely by Marla. They did not kiss. They did not embrace. It was colder than infidelity. It was a heist. Evan unlocked the fireproof filing cabinet where I kept our birth certificates and deeds. He pulled out the files, and Marla stepped forward with a high-resolution scanner wand. She scanned page after page, her movements efficient and bored. They were not stealing money. They were stealing my identity. I opened the financial subdirectory. I found a hidden folder containing transfer requests. They were small amounts, structured to avoid federal flagging. $9,000 here, $4,000 there, moved from our joint savings into a holding account under a shell company name. I did the math in my head. They had siphoned nearly $200,000 in 4 months. Then I found the PDF that made my blood run cold. It was a draft contract for the sale of our home. At the bottom, next to Evan's signature, was mine. It was perfect. The loop of the S, the sharp cross of the T, it was my hand. But I had never seen this document. Someone had practiced my signature for hours, perhaps days, until the forgery was indistinguishable from the truth. "Mom." "Are you okay?" Miles whispered from the corner where he was huddled with his coloring book. You look scary. I am just fixing a glitch." "Miles," I said, my voice tight. "Just a glitch." I clicked on a folder named FSU Correspondence. Inside was a letter addressed to the Family Safety Unit. The metadata showed it had been created 4 days ago. "To whom it may concern. I am writing to express urgent concern regarding my wife, Sierra Whitlock. Her paranoia has escalated. She refuses medication and has begun hoarding dangerous items. I fear for the safety of our son." It was a script. The events of today, the package in the car, my flight, the panic were all just scenes they were forcing me to act out to match a review they had already written. I found one last folder, medical history. It contained photos of my old medical records from 5 years ago when I fell off a ladder while installing a sensor and needed stitches. They had cropped the photos. The context of a workplace accident was gone. Now, they just looked like injuries consistent with self-harm or a drunken fall. Suddenly, a red banner flashed across the top of my screen. Admin privileges revoked. I watched the permissions list. My username, Sierra Admin, was being downgraded to guest, then restricted, then deleted. Evan was home. He was on the system. He was blinding me. "No, you don't," I hissed at the screen. You don't get to delete me." I didn't try to fight him for control. That would alert him that I was online. Instead, I initiated a dump. I selected every log, every video clip, every forged document, and the metadata proving the creation dates. I routed the download to 3 separate locations, the encrypted partition on my laptop, a remote server in Estonia I used for sandbox testing, and a physical backup to the external drive connected to my USB port. I watched the progress bar race against the permission purge. 70%, 80%. The system flickered. My view of the living room camera went black. The front door lock status vanished. Evan was systematically turning off the lights, locking me out of the house I had built. 99%. Download complete. I yanked the cord from the wall just as the screen flashed. Access denied. I sat back against the cold metal of the server rack, the external hard drive warm in my hand. He had taken the house. He had taken the money, but he had forgotten the logs. And now, I had the hash keys to prove that his truth was nothing but a code he had written himself. A beam of white halogen light swept across the dusty glass of the server room window, slicing through the darkness like a physical blade. I froze. The light did not dart around frantically. It moved with a slow, sweeping deliberation. It was a search pattern. A vehicle was prowling the perimeter of the derelict complex, and it knew exactly which building to target. The crunch of gravel under expensive tires stopped outside the loading bay door. A car door opened and closed with a soft, heavy thud. Then came the sound of footsteps. They were not running. They were walking with a terrifying, rhythmic calm. "Sierra, please come out to talk." Marla's voice floated through the broken window panes. She did not shout. Her volume was measured, pitched perfectly to sound reasonable and non-threatening. Don't make everything worse than it already is." I slammed the laptop shut, killing the glow of the screen. I grabbed Miles by the shoulder and pulled him into the deep shadow behind a rack of rusted server towers. I knelt in front of him, gripping his arms. "Listen to me," I whispered, my face inches from his. "I need you to be invisible. Breathe through your nose. Slow breaths. Even a hiccup right now is too loud." Miles nodded, his eyes wide and wet, pressing his lips together until they turned white. I looked down at the external hard drive in my hand. The indicator light was still blinking amber, finalizing the encryption sequence I had started after the download. The progress bar on the screen had been at 98% when I shut the lid. If I stayed another 30 seconds to verify the data integrity, we would be trapped in this room. If I ran now, I risked corrupting the file that proved my innocence. I chose survival. "Move," I signaled to Miles. I shoved the hard drive and the USB stick into my cargo pocket. I used the sleeve of my flannel shirt to wipe the edge of the table where my hands had rested. I could not leave fresh prints. I could not leave a timeline. Sierra Marla called out again. She was closer now, standing just outside the metal access door. "We know you are in there. We just want to help." I guided Miles toward the back wall of the room. To anyone else, it looked like a structural support panel covered in warning stickers and grime. To me, it was a technician's access chase that bypassed the main corridors. I had used it 6 years ago to run fiber optic cables without disturbing the tenants. Evan did not know it existed. Marla's blueprints would not show it. I wedged my fingers under the lip of the panel and pulled. The magnetic latch gave way with a silent puff of air. I ushered Miles into the narrow, concrete throat of the building and slid the panel back into place just as the handle of the main door began to turn. We moved through the darkness of the service tunnel, the air thick with the smell of old insulation and rat droppings. Through the thin drywall, I could still hear Marla. She was speaking differently now. "Subject is non-responsive," she said. Her voice was flat and clinical. "We are proceeding with caution. We are only focused on the immediate safety of the child. We believe the mother is currently in an agitated state." I stopped cold. She wasn't talking to me anymore. She was performing. She was speaking for a recording, likely wearing a wire or connected to a dispatch line. She was building the audio evidence for the police report. If I stayed silent, I was hiding. If I ran, I was fleeing. Every move I made was being narrated into a crime. "Keep moving," I breathed into Miles's ear. The tunnel spit us out on the north side of the facility, behind a row of overflowing dumpsters where I had hidden the car. The night air hit my face, cold and sharp. I scanned the perimeter. The white SUV was parked on the south side. We had a window of maybe 40 seconds before they circled back. I opened the passenger door and lifted Miles inside. I ran to the driver's side, slid in, and locked all 4 doors instantly. My hands were shaking so violently that I fumbled the key twice before finding the ignition. I squeezed the steering wheel, squeezing until the pain in my fingers grounded me. "Okay," I whispered to myself. "Okay." I allowed the terror to wash over me for exactly 1 heartbeat. I felt the cold sweat, the nausea, the overwhelming urge to scream, and then, just as quickly, I shut it down. I turned the key, left the headlights off, and let the car roll forward into the darkness. I wasn't a mother panic-stricken in a parking lot anymore. I was an operator executing an extraction, and I was not going to let them win. We were 3 miles out of the industrial park when Miles spoke from the darkness of the back seat. His voice was barely a thread of sound over the hum of the tires on the asphalt. "Mom, I have something else." On the phone. I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was clutching the iPad I had given him earlier, but his other hand was gripping his own small smartphone, the one we gave him for emergencies only. "What do you mean?" "Miles," I asked, keeping my eyes scanning the road for headlights behind us. "Last night, when I heard Dad in the garage, I didn't just listen. I pressed record, like you taught me to do when I hear the smoke detector chirp. I almost swerved. I pulled the car off the main road onto a gravel maintenance track near a power substation. It was pitch black, shielded by overgrown mesquite bushes. I put the car in park and turned off the engine. The silence was heavy. "Play it," I said. Miles handed me the phone. His fingers were cold. I pressed play and held the device between us. The audio quality was grainy, muffled by the garage door, but the voices were unmistakable. "She will snap today," Evan's voice said. He sounded calm, confident. I moved the funds. I changed the locks. "When she realizes she is locked out, she will spiral. It is guaranteed." Then, a woman's voice. "Marla. And the timing for the intervention. If the police don't detain her, we need a backup. Don't worry." Evan replied. "The custody evaluation is already leaning our way. I told the evaluator she has been hallucinating threats. Once she runs with Miles, she proves my point. She will sign the papers just to stay out of a psychiatric hold." I stopped the recording. I felt like the ground beneath the car had vanished. This was not a messy divorce. This was not an affair. This was a demolition. They had not just set a trap, they had rigged the entire legal system to trigger the moment I stepped on the darker floorboards. They had pre-poisoned the evaluators. They had turned my reactions into symptoms. I did not scream. I did not cry. I switched into forensic mode. I connected Miles's phone to my laptop via a cable. I copied the audio file to 3 separate folders. I renamed the file with the date, time, and location. I emailed a copy to an encrypted Proton account I had set up years ago for whistleblowing at work. I wrote a quick text file note, source Miles Whitlock's personal device. Recorded December 29th, 1930 hours. "Mom." "Am I in trouble?" Miles asked, his voice trembling. Dad said eavesdropping is for bad people." "No," I said firmly. "You are a hero. Miles, you are the only reason we are safe." But something nagged at me. Marla had found us at the warehouse too quickly. She had been outside the door within 20 minutes of me arriving there. My car had been swept for bugs last month, habit of the trade. I had my phone off. Miles's iPad was off. I turned around and looked at Miles. "Miles, let me see your backpack." He handed it over. It was a superhero backpack, worn at the straps. I emptied it on the passenger seat. Textbooks, a crumpled bag of chips, a pencil case. I felt the lining. I squeezed the padded straps. Nothing. Then I saw the decorative rubber charm hanging from the zipper, a small, seemingly innocent cartoon character. It looked new. "When did you get this?" "Miles' dad gave it to me yesterday," he whispered. He said it was for good luck on the trip. I grabbed my multi-tool from the glove box and sliced into the rubber. Inside, embedded in the silicone, was a thin, black disc. It blinked once, a tiny red LED pulse, a tracker. Professional grade. Miles gasped. He started to hyperventilate. I didn't know, Mom. I didn't know I grabbed him and pulled him into a hug over the center console. I held him tight, feeling his small heart hammering against my chest like a trapped bird. "It is not your fault," I said, my voice fierce. "Do you hear me? You didn't do anything wrong. The adults are wrong. They used you, Miles. They used you to find me. I looked at the tracker in my hand. My instinct was to smash it, to grind it into the gravel outside. But a destroyed tracker sends a lost signal alert. It tells them the target knows. It tells them the game has changed. I needed to disappear, but I needed to keep the evidence. I reached for the stainless steel thermos I kept in the backseat cup holder. I dumped out the cold coffee. I wrapped the tracker in 2 layers of aluminum foil from the emergency kit in the trunk, then dropped it into the metal thermos and screwed the lid on tight. The metal walls and the vacuum seal would act as a makeshift Faraday cage. The signal would die, but the device and the fingerprints on it would remain intact. I looked at the thermos, then at my son. They hadn't just watched me. They had turned my 8-year-old boy into a beacon. They had weaponized his love for his father to hunt his mother. I started the car. My hands were no longer shaking. I wasn't running anymore. You run from a threat. You hunt a monster. And I was going to make sure that when this ended, they would be the ones wishing they could disappear. I drove north for 2 hours, leaving the city grid behind for the winding on dark roads that bordered the Tonto National Forest. We arrived at my father's old cabin just past midnight. It was a small, weather-beaten A-frame that smelled of pine needles and neglect. Evan hated this place. He called it a rotten pile of lumber and refused to set foot here, claiming the lack of cell service gave him anxiety. That hatred made it the safest place on Earth. I parked the car behind the shed, draping a heavy tarp over it to hide the reflection of the glass. Inside, I did not turn on the main lights. I used a low-lumen tactical flashlight to sweep the room, checking for signs of wildlife or squatters. It was empty. I sat Miles down on the dusty sofa. I needed him to understand the gravity of our position without breaking his spirit. "Miles, we are going to play by new rules here," I said, crouching to meet his eyes. "Rule number 1. You do not go outside, not even to the porch. Rule number 2. If someone knocks, you do not answer. You do not make a sound. You wait for me to say the password. The password is Bluebird. Do you understand Bluebird?" he whispered, clutching the blanket I had pulled from the closet. "Mom, are the police looking for us? They are looking for a story that isn't true," I said. "We are going to write the real one." I moved to the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I did not connect to the internet yet. I opened a blank document and began to construct a timeline. In my line of work, chaos is just data that hasn't been organized yet. I needed to see the architecture of the trap. I typed furiously. 8:45 in the morning. Drop off at Phoenix Sky Harbor. 9:50. Text from Evan regarding safety. 10:14. Discovery of Marla in the garage. 10:20. Placement of the package. 10:30 police arrival at the house. 11:15 Marla's call. 12 o'clock. The tracker found in the backpack. It was a tight, linear sequence. There were no accidental variables. I needed one more data point. I picked up my burner phone, which I had purchased for cash at a gas station an hour ago, and dialed a number from memory. Diane Morrow. She lived 3 houses down from us. She was a retired librarian who spent her days gardening and watching the street with the intensity of a hawk. She was nosy, but she was honest. She picked up on the 4th ring. "Hello, Diane, it is Sierra," I said. "Don't say my name. Just listen." "Oh, honey," Diane breathed out, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The police were here, and that woman, the one with the expensive shoes. Evan told us you had a break. He said you took Miles and were driving dangerously." "What else?" "Diane, what is he telling the neighborhood?" "He is telling everyone he is terrified," she said. "He told the Peterson family that you have been off your meds for weeks. Sierra, I didn't know you were on medication." "I am not," I said, my grip tightening on the phone. "Diane, listen to me. I am safe. Miles is safe. Evan is lying. If anyone asks, tell them I sounded sane. Can you do that? He sent an email to the neighborhood watch, Diane added, hesitating. He asked us to call 911 if we saw your car. He said you might not recognize people. I hung up. The narrative was spreading like a virus. I tethered my laptop to the burner phone for a brief, encrypted connection. I logged into the school parent portal. My breath caught in my throat. There was a notification from 3 hours ago. Emergency contact update. I clicked the history. Evan had removed me as the primary authorized pickup for Miles. He had listed Marla Kingsley as family friend, emergency guardian. He was closing the doors before I even tried to walk through them. I took a screenshot of the changelog, capturing the timestamp. He was isolating a mother from her child before any legal order had been signed. That showed intent. I navigated to the website of a legal aid service I had researched years ago for a friend, Harbor and Pike Legal Aid. They had a 24-hour emergency chat line. I typed my message carefully. My husband has staged a crime scene to frame me and is tracking my child. I have evidence. I am currently in hiding for safety. How do I prove I am not kidnapping my own son? The response came back in 2 minutes. You must establish a paper trail immediately. Silence looks like guilt. Notify the authorities that you are safe and seeking counsel. I opened a fresh email window. I addressed it to the local police department's general inquiry box and the Department of Child Safety contact listed on their website. Subject regarding Miles Whitlock. I, Sierra Whitlock, am currently safe and in possession of my son, Miles. We are not missing. I am seeking immediate legal counsel regarding threats made against us and will coordinate with authorities through my attorney. I am not fleeing. I am safeguarding my child from an immediate threat. I hit send. That email created a timestamp that they could not delete. It shifted my status from fugitive to cooperative party. Suddenly, a red alert popped up on my system tray. Smart home gateway connection lost? I tried to ping the server in my house. Nothing. Then, a notification from my cloud account. Password changed. I watched as the access bars on my dashboard turned gray one by one. The cameras, the locks, the thermostat. Evan wasn't just changing passwords. He was physically resetting the hardware. He was blinding me. He knew I was watching. Mom, Miles asked from the couch. The iPad stopped working. I know. Baby, I said, closing the laptop. I had been locked out of my house, my bank accounts, and now my digital eyes. But I had the timeline. I had the audio recording. I had the tracker in the thermos. And I had the one thing Evan, in all his arrogance, had forgotten to account for. He thought he was fighting a wife who would cry and beg. He forgot he was fighting a technician who knew that once you identified the glitch, the only step left was to dismantle the system piece by piece. I parked the rental car, a nondescript gray sedan I had swapped for, at a cash-only lot on the outskirts of town, 3 streets away from my own home. I could not risk the license plate readers at the entrance of our subdivision flagging my location. I needed the birth certificates, the social security cards, and the deed to the house. If I left them, Evan would file a police report claiming I had destroyed them in a fit of hysteria. If I took them, I secured my identity. I called Diane. Diane, I need you to stand at your front window, I said, keeping my voice low as I crouched behind a neighbor's hedge. I need you to write down the exact time I walk up the driveway and the exact time I leave. I need an independent witness. Sierra. The alarm, Diane whispered, sounding terrified. Evan told everyone the system is set to maximum security because of you. I know, I said. Just watch the clock. Diane, don't look away. I moved through the shadows, avoiding the sidewalk where the streetlights pooled. I knew the Peterson family 2 doors down had a doorbell camera that captured a wide angle of the street. I knew Evan had helped them set up the sensitivity zones. I skirted their perimeter, walking through the wet grass of their side yard until I reached my own back fence. I didn't try the back door code. Evan would have disabled my PIN. Instead, I went to the pool equipment shed. Under a loose paver stone behind the filter pump, there was a small magnetic key box. I had put it there 4 years ago, not for Evan, but for myself, for a day I hoped would never come. My fingers brushed the cold plastic. It was still there. I retrieved the key and slipped to the side door. I inserted the metal blade. It turned with a heavy, satisfying click. He had changed the digital codes, but he hadn't changed the physical tumblers yet. I stepped inside. The house smelled wrong. It smelled like bleach and emptiness. I pulled out my phone instantly. I recorded the doorframe. 3:42 in the morning. I narrated softly. No forced entry, no broken glass. I am entering my own residence legally. I moved into the kitchen. I filmed the microwave clock. 2:03:42. Then I froze. The security camera on top of the refrigerator had been moved. It wasn't pointing at the back door anymore. It was angled sharply downward, focused on a specific patch of the linoleum floor near the island. It was a weird, useless angle unless you wanted to film someone crawling, unless you wanted to film someone on their knees. I scanned the hallway. A new sensor was mounted above the thermostat. It was a glass break detector, but there were no windows in that hallway. It was a trap. I moved quickly to the study. I didn't go for the main safe. Evan would have emptied that hours ago. I went to the built-in bookshelf. I pulled out the heavy encyclopedia volume on the bottom shelf, the one with the hollowed-out center where I kept the emergency packet Miles's birth certificate, our passports, and $5,000 in cash. I opened the book. Empty. My breath hitched. It wasn't just empty. The velvet lining had been ripped out. They hadn't just secured the house. They had mined it. They knew my hiding spots. They had been watching me for a long time. Suddenly, the air shattered. We oh! The internal siren screamed, a deafening, oscillating wail that vibrated in my teeth. I hadn't tripped a motion beam. I hadn't opened a window. The keypad by the door was flashing panic. This wasn't a breach alarm. This was a manually triggered panic signal, or a scheduled event. It didn't matter. The monitoring company was dialing the police right now. They would report a hostile intrusion by the estranged wife. Damn it! I hissed. I didn't run. Panic makes you clumsy. Panic makes you knock things over, and a knocked-over vase becomes evidence of violent behavior in a police report. I turned around and walked. I walked fast, my steps measured. I went back out the side door. I locked it behind me. Leaving it open would be negligence. Locking it was proof of sanity. I slipped through the fence and into the alleyway, the siren still wailing behind me, cutting through the suburban silence. I made it to the next street over, keeping my head down, forcing my breathing to remain steady. "Diane," I said into the phone. 3:46, she cried out. "Sierra, the police sirens. I hear them coming from the boulevard. I am gone." "Diane." I was there for 4 minutes. I broke nothing. Write it down. I reached the rental car and slid into the driver's seat. I didn't turn on the headlights. I let the car roll forward in neutral until I was at the end of the block. As I turned the corner, a white SUV rolled slowly past the intersection. It wasn't a police cruiser. It was a luxury model, pristine and white, with dark-tinted windows. It was crawling at 5 miles per hour. It slowed down as it passed the entrance to my street, as if the driver was waiting for a show. I gripped the steering wheel. I didn't know if it was Marla. I couldn't see through the tint, but the timing was too perfect. They were waiting for the squad cars to box me in. I merged into the traffic on the main road, my hands slick with sweat. I didn't have the papers, but I had my freedom. And as I watched the blue lights of the police cruisers race past me in the opposite direction, heading toward the trap I had just escaped, I knew that the next time we met, I wouldn't be walking into their house. I would be burning it down. Running was a strategy for prey, and I was finished being the prey. I realized that as long as I was moving, I was playing my part in their script. The fugitive wife, the unhinged mother. To break the loop, I had to stop. I had to let them think they had cornered me. I had to invite the predators into the cage. I parked the rental car 3 blocks from a payphone. I did not use my burner. I needed a line that felt desperate and untraceable. I dialed Evan's number and waited for the voicemail. I made sure my voice trembled just enough to sound exhausted, but not enough to sound irrational. Evan, you win. I am tired. I want this to be over. I will sign whatever you drafted. I just want stability for Miles. Stability, that was his trigger word. It was the password that would lower his shields. While I waited for him to take the bait, I made 2 other calls. The first was to Diane, who was currently watching the street from behind her curtains. The second was to an old contact in the fraud department of our bank. I didn't ask for favors, I asked for timestamps. Within 30 minutes, I had a secure email containing the transaction logs of the transfers Evan had made. They were sloppy. He had moved $40,000 in increments of 4,000, hoping the small volume would bypass the automated flags. He was wrong. My lawyer from Harbor and Pike, a sharp-voiced woman I had only met over encrypted chat, gave me the parameters for the surrender. Do it at the house. She had typed, "It is your legal residence. You have not been evicted, but do not be alone. And record everything. If there is a gap in the tape, they will fill it with a lie." I dropped Miles off at Diane's back door. I hugged him tight, smelling the dust and fear in his hair, but I didn't let him see my face crumble. "You stay here," I said, looking him in the eyes. "Remember the password. You are safe here. I have to go finish some work. Mom." "Are you coming back?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I am always coming back." I walked back into my house through the front door. The police were gone. Evan must have called them off the moment he heard my voicemail. He wanted a signature, not an arrest. An arrest brings a trial. A signature brings silence. I had 40 minutes before the meeting time. I went to work. I placed a high-definition camera on the bookshelf, hidden between 2 novels, aimed directly at the dining room table. That was the obvious one. If they looked for a camera, they would find that one. Then I placed a second camera, a wide-angle lens no larger than a button, on the ceiling fixture, capturing the entire room from above. This was the fail-safe. If they claimed I lunged at them, this angle would show the distance. Finally, I taped a high-gain microphone under the lip of the mahogany table. I sat at the head of the table. In front of me, I placed a thick manila folder. It looked heavy. It looked like a confession. Inside, there was nothing but old utility bills and a few pages of scribbled notes that meant nothing. It was the prop. It was the white flag. To my right, face down, was my tablet. It was queued up to the encrypted drive containing the parking lot video, the audio from the garage, the tracker photos, and the bank logs. It was the bomb, and my finger was hovering over the detonator. I sat in the silence of the house that had been stolen from me. I folded my hands on the table. I slowed my breathing. I wasn't Sierra the wife. I wasn't Sierra the mother. I was Sierra the system administrator, waiting for the hackers to log in so I could trace their IP. The doorbell rang at exactly 9 o'clock. I didn't get up. "Come in," I called out. "It is unlocked." The door opened. Evan walked in first. He looked fresh, rested, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. He didn't look like a man whose wife had vanished. He looked like a man closing a deal. Marla followed him. She wore a sympathetic expression that looked painted on. She carried a notepad, ready to document my behavior. Behind them was a man I didn't know, but I recognized the type immediately. He was tall, wearing a gray suit and holding a leather briefcase. He had the bored, impatient eyes of a lawyer who billed by the minute and regarded human emotion as an inefficiency. This was Clayton Reed. They walked into the dining room. Evan stopped at the other end of the table. He looked at the folder in front of me, then at my face. He smiled, a small, sad thing that made my skin crawl. "Sierra," Evan said softly, "I am glad you finally decided to be reasonable. We just want to help you get better. "Where is the boy?" Clayton Reed asked, looking around the room as if checking for mold. "The agreement stipulates the child must be present for the transfer of custody." "He is safe," I said. My voice was steady, cold. "Let's get this over with." Evan pulled a chair out for Marla, then sat down opposite me. Clayton opened his briefcase and slid a stack of documents across the polished wood. They looked at me with pity. They looked at me with triumph. They had no idea that the red light on the ceiling was already blinking. Clayton Reed read the terms of my surrender with the monotone indifference of a man who billed $400 an hour to destroy families. He pushed the paper across the mahogany table. The document demanded my immediate vacation of the property, supervised visitation with Miles only twice a month, and a mandatory admission to an inpatient psychiatric facility for evaluation. It was not a settlement. It was a complete erasure of my rights as a mother and a human being. I stared at the paper. I did not pick up the pen. I looked at Evan, who was studying his cuticles, and Marla, who was scribbling notes on her pad to look busy. They were waiting for the tears. They were waiting for the scream. "Before I sign," I said, my voice soft and terrifyingly steady, "I would like to play one recording for the record." Evan sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. "Sierra, please. Do not make this harder than it needs to be." I pressed the spacebar on my laptop. The audio from the garage filled the dining room. It was loud. It was clear. Evan's voice boomed from the speakers. "She will break today. She will sign anything." Then Marla's voice, cool and calculating, and the timing for the intervention. "If the police do not detain her, we need a backup." And finally, Evan again. "Don't worry, Marla, it is done." The color drained from Evan's face so fast it looked like a physical injury. Marla froze, her pen hovering over the paper. This is manipulated," Marla stammered, her composure cracking. "She is clearly having a paranoid episode and has edited audio to fit her delusion." I did not argue. I tapped the next key. The image of the black tracking device appeared on the screen, followed by the video of me pulling it from Miles's superhero backpack. "You put a tracking device on an 8-year-old child," I said, looking directly at Clayton. "Here's the serial number. It is registered to a private investigation firm that bills to a shell company. The same shell company that pays Marla Kingsley." Clayton Reed stopped looking bored. He sat up straighter, his eyes darting between his client and the screen. He turned to Evan. "Mr. Whitlock," Clayton said, his voice sharp. "Did you authorize the placement of a surveillance device on your son? Because if you did, and you did not disclose it to me, that is a felony under state surveillance laws. It was for safety," Evan stuttered, sweat beading on his forehead. "She is unstable. I had to know where he was." "For safety, I asked. Is that why you didn't get on the plane?" "Evan," I hit the final key. The video from the Phoenix Sky Harbor parking garage played. It showed Marla stepping out of the sedan. It showed her sliding the black package under my seat. It showed her taking photos to frame me. And it showed Evan getting into her car. Not a plane. The silence in the room was heavy enough to crush bones. Marla stood up abruptly. Her eyes were wild. She lunged across the table, her hand reaching for the hard drive connected to my laptop. "Give me that," she shrieked. The mask of the professional consultant shattering completely. I pulled the drive back and stood up. I did not flinch. "Don't touch the evidence," I yelled. The command rang out with the authority of a judge's gavel. Clayton Reed closed his briefcase. The click was the loudest sound in the world. "I am withdrawing as counsel effective immediately," Clayton said, standing up. "I was retained for a custody dispute, not to be an accessory to criminal conspiracy and evidence planting." "Clayton." "Wait," Evan pleaded, standing up. But the lawyer was already walking out the door. I picked up my phone. I had already dialed 911. My thumb hovered over the call button. "I have officers on the way," I said calmly. I have a folder here with the timeline, the bank transfer logs showing the embezzlement of marital assets, and the video evidence of the staged crime scene. You can sit down and wait for them, or you can run and add fleeing prosecution to the charges. 10 minutes later, the flashing lights washed over the living room walls. This time, they were not here for me. I handed the officers the folder. I watched as they separated Evan and Marla into different corners of the room. I heard Evan trying to blame Marla. I heard Marla asking for a lawyer. The narrative had flipped. I wasn't the unstable woman anymore. I was the witness to a crime. By dawn. I had an emergency protective order. The assets were frozen pending a forensic audit. Evan was removed from the home, and Marla was facing charges for filing a false police report and attempted entrapment. I drove to Diane's house as the sun was coming up. The morning air was cold and clean. I walked into the guest room where Miles was sleeping, curled up in a ball. I sat on the edge of the bed and brushed the hair from his forehead. He stirred and opened his eyes. "Mom," he whispered. "Did you have to disappear?" "No." "Baby," I said, pulling him into my arms. "I am not disappearing. We are staying right here." I held him until he fell back asleep. I realized then that for years, I had been afraid of making noise. I had been afraid of rocking the boat. But I learned that silence does not save you. The truth does not need to scream to be heard. It just needs to be recorded, backed up, and played back when the world tries to write you out of existence. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please comment your location below, and let's chat about what you would have done in Sierra's shoes. Don't forget to subscribe to Mia Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button so more people can hear these stories.